Stop crying. Pack your bags and be out before everyone leaves. My daughter-in-law said those words 6 feet from my son's casket, and for a moment I thought grief had rearranged the sentence before it reached me. The sanctuary smelled of lilies, damp wool, and the coffee the volunteers had already started brewing in the fellowship hall, as if the ordinary machinery of a Sunday could go on turning underneath the worst day of my life. Marcus's photograph stood on an easel beside the pulpit, the one Renata had chosen because he was laughing in it, sunburned, a pencil tucked over one ear from the afternoon he'd re-shingled the store roof himself rather than pay a contractor. In the casket he was 47 and still in a way no mother should ever have to see. Renata stood beside me in a black dress that looked as though it had never wrinkled. Her eyes were dry. I did not hold that against her. I had been alive long enough to know that tears are not a unit of measurement for love. What I noticed instead was the small blue folder pressed against her ribs. She had carried it through the service, through the prayers, through the long line of people telling us Marcus had been a good man. "What did you say?" I asked. She leaned in, though half the front pew could already hear her. "The building closes next Friday. I need your apartment empty tonight. Take the clothes and whatever's clearly yours. We'll sort the furniture later." Behind her, Nora stopped speaking to her guidance counselor and looked toward us. My granddaughter was 17. In 8 days she had watched her father collapse in the store's history section, ride away in an ambulance, lie unconscious in an intensive care unit, and die without opening his eyes again. That morning she had read a poem at his funeral with both hands gripping the lectern so hard her knuckles lost their color. I would not add a public fight to what she was already carrying. "This isn't the place," I said. "It's the only place you can't pretend you didn't hear me." Renata's voice stayed level, which somehow made it worse. "Marcus is gone. The building was his. I'm the executor and his wife. Crosspoint has already bought it. You've lived upstairs without paying rent for 9 years. That arrangement ended when he died. The beacon was ours. It was Marcus's future. You had your chance with it." The minister glanced over from the aisle. Renata gave him a small, apologetic smile, the expression people use when an elderly relative has grown confused in public, then turned back to me. "Please don't make me have the locks changed while the church is still full." I had taught 11th grade English at Halverson County High for 31 years. I had broken up fights, phoned parents after accidents, and stood in front of teenagers who believed volume could turn an excuse into a fact. The habit that stayed with me after retirement was simple: when someone wants me angry, I get more precise. "Are you telling me to leave my apartment tonight?" "I'm telling you it's already decided." "And you're saying the building has been sold?" "Yes." "Did Marcus sign that sale?" Her fingers tightened around the folder. "Marcus handled what needed handling." It was not an answer. I noticed, because noticing what people avoid had been most of my job for 3 decades. "I'll speak with you after Nora's gone home," I said, and tried to move toward the pew. Renata stepped in front of me. "No. You'll go upstairs, pack, and leave your key on the office desk. My brother is bringing boxes." Nora was watching now. So were 2 former colleagues and the church secretary who'd once given me a ride home in an ice storm. I could feel the room holding its breath, hungry and ashamed of the hunger. I looked at the casket. Marcus had been my only child. His father, Walter, had died 11 years before him, and for one unbearable second I imagined having to tell Walter that I had outlived our boy. I laid my hand on the polished wood. It was cool beneath my palm. "I will not discuss a property closing over my son's body," I said. "If you change the locks, keep the old cylinder. It belongs to the company." Renata stared at me as if waiting for the anger she'd rehearsed a response to. I kissed 2 fingers, pressed them to the casket, and walked toward Nora. She met me halfway. "Grandma, what's happening?" "Your mother and I disagree about the building. She said you're moving to Aunt Priscilla's." I had no sister named Priscilla. Renata had an aunt by that name in Ohio whom I'd met once, at a wedding, for perhaps 90 seconds. "Nothing's been decided," I said. Nora searched my face the way her father used to when he suspected I was editing a story for his benefit. "Did Dad want you to move?" The honest answer was that I did not know what Marcus had wanted during the last 2 weeks of his life. Our final conversation had been an argument I hadn't told Nora about and could barely admit to myself. He had asked me to sign papers for what he called a preliminary review of a sale. I told him the beacon wasn't ready to be sold. He said I was confusing memory with management. I accused him of letting Renata turn our family into a staging project. He left my apartment without finishing his coffee. 3 days later he collapsed beside the store's history table. "Your father and I were still talking," I told her. She nodded as if the answer hurt but made sense. "Don't leave without telling me." "I won't." Renata called her name from the front of the church. Nora flinched, hugged me hard and fast, and went back to her mother. "I want to tell you about the building before I tell you the rest, because a person understands theft differently once she understands what was taken. Walter and I found it in 1988, a boarded-up furniture warehouse with pigeons in the attic and rainwater tracing the back stairs, on a corner where Main Street bent toward the old courthouse. We paid $139,000 for it, every cent we'd saved plus a loan my mother swore would ruin us. The ground floor became a bookstore. The second became an events room and 2 small offices. The third stayed storage until the year Walter got sick. After his first surgery, Marcus and I converted the 3rd floor into an apartment, with an elevator that opened right beside the poetry shelf so Walter wouldn't have to manage stairs on his bad days. He lived there for 19 months. After he died, I stayed. It was never meant to be permanent. It became permanent. The way most things do, one ordinary season at a time, until you look up and it has been years. There is a memory I return to more than any other from that period, and I want to put it here before the rest of the story crowds it out. Marcus was 17, home from a debate tournament, sprawled on the loading dock steps with a legal pad because I had, that week, assigned my own students an essay on civic architecture and made the mistake of mentioning it at dinner. He wrote 3 pages about the beacon, about the copper lantern fixture we'd restored above the front door, about how a building could hold more history than any single person living in it. I gave him a B+. In red ink I wrote, "Strong images. But you mistake nostalgia for an argument. What should this building become, and who decides?" He kept that essay his entire life. I didn't know that until much later. 5 years before he died, Marcus wanted to expand the events business and borrow against the property. Our lawyer, Marisol Vance, advised us to place the building and the leases into an LLC, Beacon Properties. Marcus contributed cash and assumed more of the debt. He received 51% of the economic interest. I kept 49% and stayed on as co-manager. Major decisions, including any sale, required approval from both members. The operating agreement also granted me a 20-year occupancy right to the 3rd floor apartment in exchange for managing repairs and tenant relations. It was not charity, and it was not a favor from my son. Renata knew that. She had attended the signing. I want to be honest about something else, too, because the version of this story where I am simply wronged is not the true one. Renata's staging company, Aldergate Interiors, had genuinely helped Marcus in the early years. She'd dressed our events room for a magazine feature that doubled our weekend bookings, she'd remembered Nora's teacher conferences when Marcus forgot them. She'd sat up with me the week Walter's memorial stone was carved wrong and needed reordering. I did not dislike her. I distrusted the direction her business was pulling my son, which is a different thing, and for a long time I told myself those were the same. Complaint. They weren't. When I reached the beacon after the funeral, a white cargo van sat in the loading zone. Renata's brother, Des' boss, stood on the sidewalk with a roll of packing tape looped around his wrist. He was heavy-set, wore sunglasses though the sky was gray, and had the specific discomfort of a man doing something he half suspects is wrong but has decided not to examine. "They're not touching my apartment," I said. Des took off the glasses. "Renata said you agreed." "She knows I didn't. She's trying to get through a closing, Margaret. You can sort the rest out once the money lands." "What rest?" "My share of a sale I never approved?" One of the two college-aged workers paused with a flattened box in his hands. Des sent both men to wait in the van. "There's a contract," he said, once they'd gone. "Crosspoint put down serious money. If you blow this up, they'll sue the estate. Then the estate can show me the contract. Renata has enough on her plate. So did Marcus." I walked to the side door. My key entered the lock but wouldn't turn. A bright new cylinder had replaced the old one. "Who authorized this?" I asked. "Safety issue. Too many people had keys floating around after the funeral arrangements. I'm a manager of the company that owns the store. Marcus was the majority owner. And Marcus is dead. That doesn't make you a locksmith." I took out my phone and photographed the lock, the van, the workers, Des standing under the lantern sign. "I'm not hiding what I'm doing. This is why Renata says she can't deal with you. You turn everything into evidence. Only the things that might need remembering." Through the front windows I could see boxes stacked near the register. A black trash bag sat beside them, and a sleeve of green wool, Walter's old winter coat, extended from the opening. There are moments when anger feels almost clean. I wanted to break the glass. Instead I called the non-emergency police line and told them I was a co-owner and resident locked out of both a business and a home. Des laughed once. "You're calling the police on family, after Marcus's funeral?" "No. I'm calling about a lock. The officer who came was younger than Nora's history teacher." He looked at the operating agreement on my phone, told Des not to remove or dispose of my belongings, and wrote an incident number on a card. He also asked whether I had somewhere safe to stay. I told him I did. That was only partly true. I had $280 in my wallet, a dress I no longer wanted to wear, and a key that no longer opened anything. Before I left, I stood at the window with my palm flat against the glass, Walter's coat sleeve still visible in the bag. "I'm coming back for that," I said. Des pretended not to hear. Sylvia Ibarra had been our accountant for 16 years, first as the person who balanced payroll and calmed an angry author, later as the person who told a bride that 12 extra tables would not fit upstairs no matter what the internet promised. She lived in a small cedar house outside town with 2 elderly beagles and a dining table permanently drowning in tax folders. She made tomato soup and did not ask whether I wanted to talk about Marcus. At 8 that evening, in a borrowed pair of sweatpants that had belonged to her late husband, we opened the backup she'd kept of the March ledger. Beacon Properties had 3 sources of income: the bookstore lease, the second-floor events business, and a small law office renting 2 rooms at the rear. Monthly receipts averaged just over $18,000. After the mortgage, taxes, insurance, and reserves, the company produced a modest but reliable surplus. Our debt stood at $281,000. An appraisal 18 months earlier had valued the building at just under $1.2 million. Selling had never been unthinkable to me. Walter used to say a building should serve the living, not trap them inside someone else's memory. What I'd opposed was Marcus's proposal to sell for $790,000 to Crosspoint Development, a regional company converting old downtown properties into short-term rentals and boutique office space. After the mortgage and closing costs, my 49% would have bought a small condominium and little else. Marcus believed the sale would relieve him of work he no longer enjoyed. I believed the price ignored the growth happening on our own block. We argued about numbers. That was normal. Then Renata entered the conversation. Aldergate Interiors had expanded into 2 new markets right as the housing slowdown began. She'd leased warehouse space, financed furniture, guaranteed a line of credit. She began telling Marcus that the Beacon was dead equity, that my occupancy prevented them from using what was rightfully theirs. Marcus defended me, at first. Later he asked whether I'd consider moving if Crosspoint raised its offer. I said I'd consider any honest proposal. The ledger in front of Sylvia and me suggested the proposal had stopped being honest some time ago. Aldergate had billed the Beacon $94,000 for vacancy preparation, relocation coordination, and historic fixture recovery. The invoice was dated 11 days before Marcus collapsed. No work had been performed. The money had come from a $105,000 earnest money deposit Crosspoint placed with Cormorant Title. $94,000 had been released early on what purported to be joint seller instructions, $70,000 for my relocation and $24,000 for vacancy preparation. Both amounts went to Aldergate. Why would an escrow agent release that before closing? I asked. It shouldn't without verified instructions from both managers. Sylvia's mouth tightened. I didn't approve any. The instruction was uploaded through Marcus's transaction portal, and the verification code went to Renata's phone. He added her device 3 months ago because he was traveling for the Aldergate expansion. That gave her access to his code. It did not give her your authority, or his signature. Let me handle it. The sentence that had opened the door in so many families before mine. Where did the money go? I asked. I only know part. $40,000 to Aldergate's warehouse lender, $27,000 to a private loan company. The rest moved again. Did Marcus know? Sylvia handed me a folded printout. It was an email he'd sent her the morning before he collapsed. Sylvia, do not release tenant records or confirm vacancy. Mom has not approved a sale. Hold every Aldergate invoice and back up the March ledger. I'll explain after I talk to Renata. Below it, the timestamp, 8:14 a.m. Marcus collapsed at 11:37. I read it twice. Why didn't you show me this at the hospital? Because his wife was sitting beside you. Nora was asleep in a plastic chair, and you were waiting for a doctor to say your son might wake up. I didn't know what Aldergate meant yet. Do you now? Not completely. But I know it received $94,000 2 days before he collapsed. She closed my fingers around the paper. Don't go into the office alone. Don't sign anything. Photograph everything before you move a single box. I'm not moving. Then photograph the locks. At 74, I should already have understood that a home can disappear before you've left it. It happens first in other people's language. Your apartment becomes the upstairs space. Your furniture becomes contents. Your key becomes access that can be revoked. By the time the suitcase appears, someone has already edited you out of the sentence. Marisol Vance had represented our family since before Marcus grew his first beard, but friendship had never made her casual. She told me on the phone the next morning to forward every document, photograph, email, and incident number, and then she asked one question. Margaret, are you certain you never gave anyone electronic authority to approve a sale on your behalf? I'm certain. Not a general consent, not a resolution. Not a DocuSign proxy signed in a hurry at some point you've forgotten? No good. Certainty is useful. Memory that improves after seeing a document is not. At 9, Sylvia and I sat across from her in a conference room overlooking the courthouse lawn. Marisol had arranged the purchase agreement, the operating agreement, the occupancy schedule, the ledger, and Marcus's email in parallel rows. She did not call the consent a forgery. She called it disputed. She did not say Renata had stolen the deposit. She said funds appeared to have been dispersed outside the stated escrow purpose. Precision was not softness. It was how a fact survived contact with an accusation. She opened the operating agreement to the page I'd signed 9 years earlier. Marcus's 51% was an economic and a membership interest while he was alive. At death, his estate inherits the economic interest and information rights. It does not automatically inherit his management seat. Renata may control the estate once she's appointed personal representative, but she doesn't become a member of Beacon Properties simply by writing "successor majority owner" at the bottom of a letter. So she can't sell the building. Not alone. The company owns the building, not Marcus personally. A sale of substantially all assets requires both members' approval under your agreement and under state law. What we have now is a surviving member, an estate with economic rights, a succession clause, and a disputed contract. It isn't simple. But it isn't what her notice claims either. And my apartment? She slid the occupancy schedule toward me. This is not a revocable favor. It's a contractual right through 2038, terminable only for specific causes after notice and a chance to cure. The death of another member isn't one of them. Even if you were only a residential tenant, a midnight email and a changed lock still wouldn't constitute a lawful eviction. Sylvia let out a breath she'd apparently been holding. Can I go home? I asked. We'll demand access this morning. If refused, we seek an emergency order. Don't break in. Don't confront Renata alone. Don't remove company records without logging them. And don't discuss any of this on social media. I don't use social media. Everyone says that until a church friend posts their version of it for them. She was right. By the time we left her office, a photograph from the funeral had already surfaced in a community Facebook group. It showed Renata speaking to me near the casket. Please keep the Reyes family in your prayers, the caption read. Marcus's mother is struggling with grief and anger and has been challenging Renata's right to settle her husband's estate. Nora needs peace right now. There was no direct accusation. That made it effective. Within hours, strangers had supplied the missing charges themselves, that I had shouted during the service, demanded the insurance money, even tried to take Nora away. Former students defended me. Others said grief made older people irrational. None of them had seen the operating agreement. Marisol told me to write one sentence and nothing more. There is a private dispute concerning the ownership and management of the Beacon, and I will address it through the proper legal process while our family grieves Marcus. I posted it, then turned off my phone. By early afternoon, Marisol had emailed Renata and the attorney named on the purchase contract, demanding immediate restoration of my access, preservation of all records, suspension of the closing, and return of any money disbursed from the Crosspoint deposit. The estate's probate lawyer replied that he'd handled only routine probate matters and hadn't prepared the property sale documents. Renata replied from her personal account an hour later. My mother-in-law is emotionally unstable. Her presence threatens the closing and my daughter's security. She voluntarily surrendered access after the funeral. The photograph of the changed lock carried a timestamp 41 minutes before the officer arrived. Grief can blur memory. A timestamp is less easily persuaded. At 2, Grand Ose from Crosspoint called Marisol's office and was put on speaker with my permission. We were told Mrs. Reyes had agreed to relocate to a retirement community. We received member consent and a seller affidavit. You have a disputed consent dated while one signatory was medically incapacitated, Marisol said, and the other was locked out of the building. A silence. We weren't aware of a hospitalization on the execution date. You attended the funeral yesterday. I signed the guest book. I didn't know the timeline. You do now. Grant said Crosspoint would pause all physical activity at the property for 48 hours while counsel reviewed the documents. He would not agree to cancel the closing. Did your company authorize $94,000 to Aldergate Interiors? I asked. Marisol gave me a look but let the question stand. We wired earnest money to Cormorant Title, Grant said. The agent could release it only on executed member consent, tenant certifications, proof of a relocation agreement, and joint disbursement instructions. And you received all 4? We received documents that appeared to satisfy all 4. There was no relocation agreement. We received one. It bears your initials. The room went very still. Send it, Marisol said. It arrived 5 minutes later. The document stated that I had accepted $70,000 in relocation compensation, waived my occupancy right, and would vacate before closing. My initials appeared on every page. The signature on the final page resembled mine more closely than the one on the consent form. Beneath it, a bank account at a credit union I'd never once used, where the $70,000 had allegedly already been sent. Sylvia leaned over my shoulder. Aldergate Bank's there. The whole mechanism suddenly made sense. On paper, $70,000 had paid me to leave. In reality, $94,000 had gone to Renata's company, 70 labeled relocation, 24 labeled preparation. Once I was physically gone and my belongings boxed, Crosspoint would see exactly what it had been promised, a vacant apartment and no protesting resident. That's why she needed me out before the funeral ended, I said. Vacancy wasn't just personal, Marisol said quietly. It was a closing condition. That sentence hurt in a different place. Renata hadn't chosen the funeral because grief had made her cruel. She'd chosen it because witnesses would see me leave with a suitcase, and because she believed sorrow would make me too weak to ask what my leaving was worth to her. We filed for emergency relief that afternoon. It did not look dramatic. There was no gavel, no declaration that truth had arrived. Marisol drafted a verified complaint. Sylvia signed an affidavit about the ledger and Marcus's email. We attached the operating agreement, occupancy schedule, photographs, the police incident card, the purchase contract, the disputed consent, the relocation document. A courier carried paper copies to the clerk because the e-filing system rejected one attachment twice. I did not feel victorious. I felt like a mother who had buried her son 28 hours earlier and was now explaining to strangers why her daughter-in-law could not throw away her late husband's coat. That night, neither Sylvia nor I slept much. At 2 in the morning she showed me 8 months of Aldergate invoices. 3 round number payments totaled $31,000, separate from the $94,000 taken from escrow. Marcus had approved all 3 and coded them as event development expenses. No loan agreement existed, no reimbursement had arrived. Don't make him innocent because he died, Sylvia said. And don't make him guilty because you're angry he can't explain it. Follow the records. The emergency hearing lasted 43 minutes the next morning. Renata sat with the probate lawyer who denied preparing the sale papers, plus a litigation attorney Crosspoint had insisted she retain. She wore gray and kept one hand on a silver locket with a small photo of Marcus inside it. I found myself wondering whether grief and deception could occupy the same hand. Of course they could. People rarely wait to finish one emotion before starting another. Marisol didn't ask the judge to rule on ownership, fraud, or damages. She asked for narrow, temporary relief, restore my access, prohibit removal of property or records, suspend the sale, preserve all electronic data. Renata's attorney argued I was a minority owner interfering with the estate's urgent need for liquidity, and that my occupancy endangered a contract worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The judge read the operating agreement twice. Where is the instrument admitting the estate or Mrs. Reyes as a member of this LLC? It's implicit in Marcus Reyes's will and his majority interest. Show me where this agreement makes anything implicit. He couldn't. Marisol then walked the judge through the medical timeline. My phone's location history and 3 funeral planning receipts placed me at the hospital and the church office on the day I'd supposedly signed from an IP address associated with Aldergate's warehouse. Renata's attorney argued the electronic execution could have occurred earlier and been dated later. Then the audit trail will clarify that, the judge said. Crosspoint's counsel has agreed to provide it. She restored my access by 5 that afternoon, prohibited any closing or disposal of property for 14 days, and ordered every party to preserve phones, computers, cloud files, surveillance recordings, and bank records. She did not declare anyone dishonest. She said the submitted documents raised serious and irreparable questions. Outside the courtroom, Renata turned on me. Are you proud of yourself? Her voice cracked on the last word. No, you froze the only money Nora and I have. The building isn't the only money you have. Marcus had life insurance. You own your house. The house secures Aldergate's credit line. The insurance is $250,000, and Marcus guaranteed more than that. It was the first honest number she'd given me. How much? You don't get to audit my marriage. You built your company on $131,000 of it. You made it my business. She stepped closer. Marcus agreed to keep Aldergate alive. Then show me the agreement. He was my husband. He was also your business partner. Those aren't the same account. Tears rose in her eyes, but her voice went colder. He spent his whole life trying to earn one sentence from you. Every repair, every event, every expansion. He was waiting for you to say he'd made the beacon better. You never did. Now you're using his death to take it back. The accusation landed because part of it was true. I had praised Marcus often as a son and a father. As a business partner, I corrected more than I thanked. I believed high standards showed respect. He may have experienced them as a locked door. I can't answer for every way I failed him, I said. But I didn't sign that consent. She walked away before I could ask about Nora. The new key to the beacon was waiting at the police station, not with Renata, her attorney had arranged it that way. An officer accompanied Sylvia and me while we went floor by floor, photographing each room, confirming no one else was inside. The ground floor looked bruised. Half the new releases had already been boxed. The register drawers hung open. Red stickers marked shelves Crosspoint wanted preserved, blue marked fixtures to be removed, yellow marked items to be evaluated. Walter's old reading chair had a yellow sticker on its back. Upstairs, framed photographs from weddings and author events had been stacked face down. Marcus's office had been cleared to a desk, 2 empty filing cabinets, and a pale rectangle on the wall where his college diploma used to hang. My apartment was worse. Every drawer stood open. Clothes lay in unlabeled boxes. Photographs had been pulled from their frames. The kitchen held a jar of cinnamon and 3 chipped mugs. My medication sat in a clear plastic bag on the counter, as if prepared for intake at a jail. Walter's green coat was no longer in the trash bag, it lay folded on the bed. For one foolish second I thought Renata had remembered what it meant. Then I saw the yellow sticker on the sleeve, historic textile. I sat on the edge of the bed. The officer asked whether I needed medical attention. No, I said. I need that sticker removed. I peeled it off slowly, the adhesive dragging at the wool. Walter had worn that coat for 23 winters. He'd worn it the evening Marcus proposed to Renata in the events room downstairs, and the day Nora came home from the hospital as a newborn. Crosspoint had filed it under decorative object because no one involved had thought to ask whose arms had once filled it. We can stop, Sylvia said from the doorway. No, I opened every box and made an inventory. 2 watches were missing, along with my passport, Walter's jewelry case, the original occupancy agreement, and a fireproof document pouch. Marcus's brown briefcase, the one Nora had mentioned on the phone, wasn't in his office or my apartment. The company server had been removed from the locked cabinet downstairs. Missing doesn't mean stolen, the officer said, adding each item to his report. They might have been moved for safekeeping. Then whoever made them safe can say where. At 6, Renata's attorney wrote that personal valuables had been moved to her home for safekeeping and would remain there until the inventory dispute was resolved. Marisol responded within 4 minutes, personal property is not part of the LLC inventory. Return every listed item by noon tomorrow through counsel. She did. The watches, the passport, the jewelry case, the pouch all returned by the next afternoon. She said she'd never seen Marcus's briefcase or the server. The pouch held the original occupancy schedule and 9 years of insurance records. One policy I'd genuinely forgotten, a $300,000 keyperson policy owned by Beacon Properties on each of us. The company was beneficiary, and our operating agreement directed the proceeds first to working capital and then to redeem a deceased member's interest. Sylvia checked the ledger, premiums current, next payment due in 12 days. This doesn't fix the sale, I said. No. But it means the company isn't dependent on Crosspoint's money to survive Marcus's death. It was the first piece of good news, and I distrusted it immediately. Good news arriving mid-grief can feel like an accusation. It asks you to consider a future while you're still bargaining with the past. The next morning, Grant Osei came to the Beacon with 2 Crosspoint attorneys and a woman from corporate compliance. He looked around the half-packed bookstore as though noticing, for the first time, that a building holds more than rentable square footage. We relied on representations from the seller's transaction coordinator, he said. Who was that? Marisol asked. Renata Reyes. She wasn't the company manager. We were told Marcus delegated authority to her during his hospitalization. He never regained consciousness after entering the hospital. Grant glanced at his own lawyers. That wasn't disclosed. Sylvia laid the relocation agreement on the table. Who supplied the bank instructions for Mrs. Reyes's payment? Aldergate submitted them, identified as her relocation agent. Did anyone confirm that with her? The compliance officer answered this time. Our procedure required a callback to the occupant. The file shows a callback to the number listed on your relocation authorization. Which number? She read the last 4 digits. They matched Renata's phone. The verification step had not been skipped. It had been redirected by the document it was supposed to verify. The transaction file also contains an email from what was represented as your address, she said. It was an address I recognized instantly. margaret.reyes.beacon@gmail.com. Mine was marge.reyes.beacon@gmail.com. The false address had been built by inserting my full first name where I never used it. The email said I had arthritis, found electronic signing difficult, and had authorized Renata to coordinate everything on my behalf. It ended with a line I would never in my life have written. At my age, peace is more valuable than ownership. Isn't that your belief too? Is it? Grant asked, carefully. Peace purchased by forging my name is only quiet for the buyer. The audit trail on the consent form showed both my signature and Marcus's applied from the same IP address at Aldergate's warehouse. Marcus's had been placed at 4:14 p.m. on a Friday. Mine followed 7 minutes later. The verification codes had gone to a phone ending in 8892. Renata's number ended in 8892. Crosspoint suspended the contract that afternoon and demanded return of the full $105,000 deposit. Cormorant Title still held $11,000. The $94,000 released to Aldergate was gone. Grant didn't apologize, companies rarely do before their lawyers have priced the word, but he did say Crosspoint would preserve its file and cooperate with lawful requests. On his way out, he removed one red sticker from a walnut shelf and carried it out in his pocket, as if that small correction cost him something. The sale didn't vanish when Crosspoint suspended it. It became a threat pointed in two directions. If the contract was invalid, Renata, and possibly Marcus's estate, could face claims for the missing deposit and Crosspoint's costs. If it was enforceable, I could lose my home and my business. Either way, Nora's inheritance would be dragged through litigation. That afternoon, Renata filed a petition to dissolve Beacon Properties. She alleged that Marcus's death had left the company unable to operate, that I had blocked a necessary sale out of sentiment, and that continuing the business would waste the estate's economic interest. She asked the court to appoint a receiver and complete a commercially reasonable sale. Attached was a declaration stating Marcus had approved the Crosspoint transaction before his collapse and had merely formalized it later through authority he'd delegated to her. She did not mention that the same phone had signed for me. Can she do that? I asked Marisol. The estate has standing to seek dissolution. Standing isn't the same as winning. A judge can consider less drastic alternatives, including a buyout if the agreement provides one. It does. Then we have to prove the company can perform it. The succession clause set the buyout price at fair market value of the deceased member's economic interest, less company debt, adjusted for unauthorized distributions and any insurance proceeds allocated to the buyout. It would require an independent appraisal and a full accounting. The insurance would help. Marcus's 51% could still be worth far more than I had. I may have to buy my son's share from his widow to keep the place we built together, I said. You are not buying your son, Marisol said. You are settling ownership after death. Don't let grief turn every number into a verdict on love. It was good legal advice and nearly impossible human advice. The following Sunday I opened the Beacon for the first time since Marcus collapsed. I'd planned to wait another week, but the mortgage, the employees, and the tenants did not pause because our family was broken. Sylvia set a small framed photo of Marcus near the register. No candles, no donation jar. Just his name and the years he'd lived. People came all morning. Some bought books they didn't need. Some hugged me. Some asked questions that were none of their business. One woman told me she'd read that Renata and Nora were about to be homeless because I'd stolen the insurance money. The company policy belongs to the company, I said. No claim has been paid. That's not what Renata said. Then Renata and I disagree. At noon a delivery driver brought 20 prepaid boxes of a self-help title called Letting Go Without Losing Yourself. Marcus had ordered them for an event scheduled after his death. We held it anyway. 30 people came. When the author asked what I was having trouble letting go of, I told her, the belief that if I understand every fact, I'll understand. My son. She did not offer an answer. When the crowd left, I found Nora sitting on the back stairs. She'd come in through the law office so her mother wouldn't see her car out front. I told you not to disobey her, I said. You said you wouldn't ask me to. You didn't say I had to obey. She sounded so much like Marcus that I had to look away. Your mother is afraid, I said. She's afraid, Nora said. She's also lying. She handed me an envelope. Inside, a storage facility receipt from a 24-hour unit near Aldergate's warehouse. Unit 314, rented in Marcus's name the afternoon after his collapse. The payment card belonged to Renata. I found it in Mom's purse, Nora said. I handed it back. Then put it exactly where you found it. The company server could be in there. Dad's briefcase. And if you took this without permission, her lawyer will say I sent you to search her things. You didn't. That won't stop them saying it. Her face tightened. So we do nothing? No. You tell your mother you found it, and ask her why it's in your father's name. Or you give the information to an adult whose job it is to investigate. You don't become my investigator because you're 17. Because I'm Dad's daughter before I'm anyone's witness, she said, quoting me back to myself, which I did not remember teaching her but recognized instantly as mine. She started to cry. Everybody keeps saying they're protecting me while they take away every choice I have. I sat beside her for a while. Neither of us spoke. What choice do you need today? I finally asked. I want to stay at my school. I want to work here on Saturdays like Dad promised. And I want someone to tell me whether he helped Mom do this. I can help with the first two. The third answer may take time and it may not be clean. I don't need him clean. Neither do I. She put the receipt back in the envelope and left through the front, deliberately, so her mother would know exactly where she'd been. Renata called that evening. Stay away from my daughter. She came to the store. You filled her head with accusations. I sent her home with the paper she brought. A pause. What paper? Ask her. Her breathing changed. If you move her before graduation to punish her for seeing me, I said, I won't fight you through her. But I'll make sure she knows my door stays open. Your door is the problem. Marcus spent his whole life walking through it whenever you called. He owned 51%. Then why did you need my signature? She hung up. The next morning her attorney disclosed the storage unit through formal preservation correspondence. Renata claimed she'd rented it to secure company equipment and Marcus's papers after the hospital grew crowded with visitors. She agreed to a neutral forensic inventory. The company server was inside. So was Marcus's brown briefcase. So were 14 pieces of furniture already bearing cross-point inventory stickers removed from the beacon before any closing had legally occurred. A neutral vendor photographed and numbered everything before two technicians imaged the server. Renata watched from across the unit. She did not look at me until the vendor locked Marcus's briefcase and opened the lid. Inside, 3 yellow legal pads, the original cross-point letter of intent, a printed copy of our operating agreement, and an envelope with my name written across it in Marcus's hand. I reached for it. The technician put a palm over the envelope. Everything gets logged first. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a copy of the appraisal and a handwritten column of figures. At the bottom, Marcus had written, "Mom's floor, 1.05. Mine should be 2. It was not a farewell letter. It was not the apology of a man who somehow sensed he was about to die. It was a working note about the lowest price he believed we should accept for the beacon, $1,050,000. Nearly $260,000 more than the contract Renata had tried to close. That was before the roof estimate, Renata said. The roof estimate was $31,000, Sylvia said. And the elevator, and the masonry, and the tenant concessions. Together they don't explain a $260,000 gap. Her attorney touched her arm. Don't debate the accounting here. I kept my eyes on the pads. The first held dates, calls, short notes and Marcus's compressed handwriting. Mostly ordinary, grant, revised tenant schedule. Mom's roof numbers. Marisol, succession clause. Then, 9 days before he collapsed, the notes changed. Ask R about escrow release. Why is my relocation figure $70,000 going to Aldergate, lie? Device ending 8892 still on the bank, reverse before quarter close. The second pad listed Aldergate payments. 5 were circled, 3 marked approved temporary. Their total, $31,000. Beneath the rest, a line and a note, did not approve. There it was, the answer Sylvia had warned me not to invent for myself. My son had helped move company money into his wife's business. Not all of it. Not the $94,000 from Crosspoint. But enough to know a line had been crossed before he tried to step back. Over it. Renata spoke before I could. He knew Aldergate was borrowing from the beacon. The operating agreement requires both managers to approve related party loans, Sylvia said. He controlled 51%. He controlled 51% of the economics, I said. He didn't control 100% of the truth. Renata looked at me for the first time without armor. You think 3 words on a legal pad make him your innocent boy again? No. I think he made decisions he should have told me about. I think he tried to correct some of them. I think he ran out of time. Those facts can stand beside each other. Her eyes dropped. He would have hated you reading this in front of strangers. Then he should have lived long enough to explain it. Himself. The cruelty of that sentence struck us both. She turned away. I gripped the back of a metal folding chair until I trusted my voice again. The third pad was mostly blank. On the first page, a draft of a conversation he'd never finished writing. Mom, I let this get further than I told you. The original offer isn't the deal on paper anymore. R says she can put the money back once the Charlotte project pays. I don't believe the timing anymore. I need you to be angry after you listen. The sentence ended there. I read it twice. I need you to be angry after you listen. My son had known me well enough to anticipate the order of my emotions, had feared I'd stop hearing him the second I understood the betrayal. Perhaps that was why he'd never finished the conversation in my apartment. Perhaps my first accusation had confirmed every reason he'd had for waiting. The furniture told a smaller story. 8 pieces belonged to the beacon. 6 belonged to Aldergate and had been used at events under a standing rental arrangement. Crosspoint stickers had been applied by a junior property manager during a walkthrough 4 days before Marcus collapsed. The visit log listed Renata as seller representative. Neither Marcus nor I had attended. The server told the largest story of all. It took 4 days for technicians to index and recover deleted material, during which the judge extended the temporary order. Nora went back to school. I moved back into my apartment, though I slept on a mattress between boxes because putting the rooms back together felt too much like pretending nothing had happened. Every morning I carried one box down to the long table near the history section and unpacked it there. Customers began helping without being asked. A retired librarian reshelved books. A former student rehung photographs. The law office tenant sent her receptionist upstairs with labels and a pot of coffee. I accepted the help, because refusing would have turned independence into vanity. Sylvia taped a printed timeline across the wall of Marcus's office. 8 months before his death, Marcus added Renata's phone as a secondary verification device while he traveled for Aldergate. It let her receive his codes, it did not make her a signatory. Over the next 5 months, he approved 3 disguised Aldergate advances totaling $31,000. He charged no interest, created no loan agreement, and told neither Sylvia nor me. Then Aldergate lost a $209,000 Charlotte contract, and its lender froze further draws. Renata began negotiating with Grant directly. She described my occupancy as informal, pushed the price down to $735,000 in exchange for speed, and promised a vacant apartment. 16 days before Marcus collapsed, she created the false email address in my name. 11 days before, she generated the $94,000 invoice. 8 days before, Crosspoint funded Cormorant's escrow. 7 days before, forged joint instructions released $70,000 for my supposed relocation and $24,000 for vacancy preparation, both to Aldergate. 5 days before his collapse, Marcus opened the ledger backup and saw the invoice, the release, and the false relocation agreement. He changed his bank password, Renata reset it through account recovery. He searched our operating agreement for unauthorized distribution and indemnification and reopened the key person policy. On his final morning he emailed Sylvia at 8:14, drafted a disclosure to Marisol at 9:02, called Renata at 10:03, and left Grant a voicemail at 10:26. At 10:41 he opened a new email addressed to me and never wrote a subject line. At 11:37 the emergency call went out from his office. The forged consent forms were created 3 days later, while he lay unconscious. The relocation agreement had been backdated. I stood in front of that timeline until the ink blurred. Was the aneurysm caused by stress? I asked. Marisol took off her glasses. Don't do that to yourself or to Renata. A cerebral aneurysm can rupture without any warning at all. Nothing in these records tells us why it happened that morning and not some other morning. He called her 90 minutes before he collapsed, that's a fact. Everything passed that is grief trying to prosecute a medical event, and grief loses that case every time. It doesn't get to hold anyone responsible for a blood vessel. I hated the sentence. I also needed it, the way you need a hand on your shoulder in a room that's tilting. There was one gap left in the timeline. Of the money Aldergate had received, $29,000 hadn't gone to the private lender at all, it had gone to an account ending in 4416. Whose account? I asked. We need the bank records, Sylvia said. Renata's attorney produced them 2 days later rather than force another motion. The account belonged to Nora. It was a custodial savings account Marcus and Renata had opened the year she was born. Before the transfer, it held $906. Renata had moved $29,000 into it the day after Marcus collapsed. For several hours, I believed the ugliest version of that fact. She had hidden stolen money inside her own daughter's name. Then a second record arrived. The next morning, Renata had moved the same $29,000 out again into a prepaid tuition plan for Nora's first year at university. She had stolen money to protect her daughter's education. The purpose did not clean the act. It did make the act more human, which was, I found, deeply inconvenient. Anger prefers villains who never pay for anyone's tuition. Nora learned about the transfer before I did. Renata told her during an argument, then blamed the court's asset freeze for endangering college itself. My granddaughter came to the beacon after closing and set her acceptance folder on the counter. I don't want it, she said. The money. Any of it. Mom says she did everything for me. Some of what she did may have been for you. That doesn't mean you asked her to do it. If I use the tuition, does that make me part of it? No. But the money may have to be returned. She sat on the stool Marcus used to use when he repaired the register. Then I won't go to college. That decision is bigger than this week. Everybody says that when they want me to wait until I stop being angry. Sometimes waiting lets anger finish telling you what it knows. What does yours know? I looked around the store. Boxes still lined one wall. Marcus's photograph stood by the register. Walter's coat hung over a chair because I hadn't yet carried it upstairs. Mine knows your father lied to me about the first payments, I said. It knows your mother forged my name and tried to put me out of my own home. It also knows your father tried to stop the larger transfer, and your mother was terrified you'd lose everything. Anger doesn't get to erase the facts it dislikes. Nora pressed both palms over her eyes. I wish you'd just say she's terrible. Would that help, for 5 minutes? Maybe. Then for 5 minutes you may be angry without making it a permanent decision. She dropped her hands. That's a teacher answer. I had 31 years of practice. The $29,000 was returned to escrow under a court-approved agreement. Nora signed nothing and was never named in the filing. I insisted on both points. Marisol said the law already protected a minor from being treated as the architect of an adult's transaction, but I wanted the record itself to say, in writing, what our family had failed to say out loud. Nora was not collateral. The dissolution hearing was set for 3 weeks out. Before it, the court appointed a temporary financial monitor rather than a receiver. The monitor could review every payment and approve anything outside our ordinary expenses. I retained day-to-day management. Renata, as the estate's representative, received information rights but no signing authority. The arrangement pleased no one, which is one reason I trusted it. An independent appraiser valued the building at $1.3 million. Crosspoint objected that the estimate assumed continued operation and ignored urgent repairs. A second estimate placed necessary work at $68,000 over 2 years, nowhere near enough to explain a $260,000 gap between Marcus's own floor price and the contract Renata had tried to close. The key person insurance claim was approved for $300,000 and placed into a restricted LLC account, money I couldn't touch for personal expenses, couldn't hide from the estate, could only apply toward the buyout under the succession agreement. For the first time, a path existed that didn't require selling the building at all. Renata gave a local lifestyle website an interview about a widow fighting an older generation's control. She did not name me, but the photograph of Aldergate's empty warehouse made the subject obvious. 2 weddings cancelled. I made no public reply. Nora had already lost her father. I would not turn the worst decisions of both parents into content before the record was complete. The monitor's report arrived 9 days before the hearing. It confirmed $125,000 in improper related party payments. $31,000 Marcus had knowingly approved and concealed, plus $94,000 released from the Crosspoint deposit after Renata reset his password. Of that $94,000, $70,000 was labeled relocation and $24,000 vacancy preparation. The report separately identified $16,000 in legitimate Aldergate services, flowers, furniture rental, event photography, properly invoiced and paid. Those real services could not be used to justify the others. Marcus bore responsibility for concealing $31,000 from me and misclassifying it. Renata bore responsibility for far more. The report never used the word responsible in a moral sense, it simply attributed transactions. That distinction spared neither of them. The courtroom was nearly empty on the day of the hearing. CrossPoint's attorneys sat in the back, since the company had filed its own separate claim to recover the deposit. Renata sat across the aisle with two lawyers. Nora was at school, I'd asked her not to come, and for once every adult in the family had agreed on something. Renata's attorney argued the LLC had become unworkable, the estate owned 51% of the economics, I controlled management, neither party trusted the other, and litigation was consuming value the parties could otherwise share. A receiver and sale, he said, would convert conflict into cash. Marisol answered with operations. The mortgage was current. Tenants were paying. Insurance proceeds were restricted and available for the contractual buyout. An appraiser had valued the property. I had proposed a calculation and a payment schedule. Dissolution, she said, would reward the very unauthorized transaction that had manufactured the alleged emergency in the first place. The judge asked whether I believed I could manage the beacon at 74. It was a fair question. I didn't take it as an insult. Not forever, I said. I can manage it now. Sylvia Ibarra handles accounting and events. The bookstore has its own manager. The law office maintains its lease. I've also begun interviewing a professional property manager. My plan isn't to prove I never age. My plan is to keep one person's panic from deciding the building's future before the numbers are honest. And your relationship with the estate? The agreement provides for a buyout. I intend to complete it. Even after learning my son authorized some of the transfers. I looked toward Renata. Especially after learning that the estate should receive exactly what his interest is honestly worth, adjusted by the agreement and the accounting. No more, because he died. No less, because I'm disappointed. The judge denied immediate dissolution, ordered the valuation process finished, and sent us to mediation. The monitor would remain for 60 days. If the buyout failed, the estate could return and seek further relief. Renata left without speaking to me. Outside, under the courthouse awning, Grand Osei was waiting with rain running off the edge in a silver line. He handed Marisol a settlement proposal. CrossPoint would terminate the purchase contract, release any claim to the beacon, and waive consequential damages if the missing $94,000 was restored within 90 days. In exchange, all parties would release claims against CrossPoint arising from its reliance on the false consents. Why now? I asked. Grant looked older than he had that first afternoon in the bookstore. Because our approval process failed. Because litigating against a widow's mother-in-law and a 74-year-old resident isn't the story we want attached to our name. And because the documents aren't going to improve with discovery. Your company helped create the pressure for vacancy. Yes. It was the first unqualified answer he'd given me in 3 weeks. Will you put that in writing? The agreement says our file accepted occupancy representations without direct verification from you. That isn't quite the same sentence. It's the sentence counsel approved. I nearly smiled. Then we both still come back to paper. The mediation happened at Marisol's office, on what would have been Marcus's 48th birthday. I noticed the date signing in. Renata noticed it too. Neither of us mentioned it. The mediator kept us in separate rooms while numbers traveled down the hall. At the $1.3 million appraisal, after debt and costs, Marcus's 51% began at $512,000. I refused to charge Renata's entire wrongdoing against his estate, doing so would make Nora absorb a decision her father had not authorized. Renata responded with her first written admission. She accepted personal responsibility for the $94,000 escrow transfer. Only the $31,000 Marcus knowingly approved would reduce his buyout. The revised price was $481,000. The company's $300,000 insurance proceeds would apply at closing. The remaining $181,000 would be paid to the estate over 5 years. Aldergate's liquidation, Nora's return $29,000, and a small cash value policy would restore the cost of running. Painful. Also, finally, possible. Then the mediator brought the non-financial terms. Renata wanted my agreement that all contact with Nora would occur only with her permission until Nora turned 18. She wanted Marcus's photograph removed from the bookstore counter. She wanted me barred from speaking publicly about the transactions, and required, forever, to describe the forged signatures only as disputed, even after settlement. I read the page twice. Know which part? Marisol asked. All of it. A confidentiality clause can protect Nora. A clause about private financial terms can protect Nora. A clause that lets Renata decide whether her daughter is allowed to see her grandmother protects Renata. Nora is still a minor, and I will respect lawful parental decisions. I will not sign away a relationship as currency. Marcus's photograph stays unless Nora asks me to move it. And I will not call a forged signature disputed once the person who made it has admitted what she did. Marisol carried that down the hall. An hour passed. The office grew quiet enough that I could hear the old elevator cables shifting in the building next door. At 6:30, Renata came into our room without the mediator. Her attorney followed and stopped in the doorway. She set Marcus's silver locket on the conference table. The tiny photograph inside showed him holding Nora as a newborn. Do you know what he said, after she was born? Many things. He said he'd never make her audition for love. I remembered Walter had once asked whether fatherhood frightened him, and Marcus had said he was afraid of repeating every silence in our family. Then he'd held Nora against his chest and promised she would never have to perform for affection. He was 29. He kept trying to earn yours, Renata said. This negotiation isn't the place to make him 12 years old again. You think paper keeps you from doing that? No. I think paper keeps either of us from rewriting him entirely. She sat across from me, and without the practiced posture and careful makeup she looked simply exhausted. I forged the signatures, she said. Her attorney stepped forward. Renata, they already know. She didn't look away from me. Marcus agreed to the first payments. He agreed we should sell. He told Grant we could get you to move if the price was right. Then he found out I'd changed the terms and released the deposit. He said he was going to tell you and Marisol. I asked for 48 hours to replace the money. He said I'd used all my 48 hours a long time ago. I heard my son's voice inside that sentence. What happened on your last call? I asked. I told him the bank access was cancelled. He said he'd already printed everything. I told him if Aldergate failed, we'd lose the house, my company, Nora's tuition, every dollar he'd put in. He said losing money wasn't the same as losing everything. I told him that was easy for Reyes to say, because the beacon would always catch him. Her hands tightened around each other. Then he said he was going downstairs to tell you. Marcus had never reached the elevator. Sylvia had found him beside the history table. Renata began to cry. It wasn't graceful. Her shoulders folded, and for several seconds no words came at all. When the doctor said he wouldn't wake up, I knew the only way to replace the money was to close the sale. Grant needed consent. I had your signature off a holiday card. Marcus's electronic signature was already in the account. I told myself he'd wanted to sell, so I was only finishing what he'd already decided. I told myself you'd get 70,000 and a nice condominium. I told myself so many things that by the funeral, they sounded like facts. Why order me out beside his casket? She closed her eyes. The relocation payment required possession before closing. Crosspoint's property manager was coming that evening. If you walked out with a suitcase in front of witnesses, I could tell them the agreement had been performed. The confession didn't feel like a victory. It felt like hearing the mechanism inside a trap after it had already closed on you. You put Walter's coat in a trash bag. Des did that. I told him to clear the apartment. And you labeled it a historic textile. Crosspoint did. Everyone did one small thing, and somehow I was no longer living there. She wiped her face. I'm not asking you to forgive me. Good, I said. Forgiveness offered inside a settlement is just another kind of payment. I won't buy it from you, and you can't demand it from me. Then what do you want? I thought of the funeral, the changed lock, the fake email, the bag stacked around my bed. I thought of Marcus's 31,000 and the unfinished sentence on his legal pad. I thought of Nora asking whether using the tuition made her part of the lie. I want the building transaction fully unwound, I said. I want the money accounted for. I want Nora kept out of the releases, the testimony, and every public statement. I want you to stop using Marcus's death to claim authority he never gave you. And I want you to tell Nora the truth before someone else teaches it to her as gossip. If I tell her everything, she may never speak to me again. That's not a reason to let her love a version of you that doesn't exist. Renata looked toward the door. And after that? After that, consequences belong to the people whose job it is to decide them. Our family doesn't get to control the verdict. She withdrew the contact restriction, accepted a narrower confidentiality clause protecting Nora's financial and school records specifically, and agreed neither of us would make false public statements about the other. Marcus's photograph stayed in the bookstore. The signatures were named in the settlement, plainly, as unauthorized and placed by Renata. We signed at 8:14 in the evening, the exact minute Marcus had emailed Sylvia on the morning he collapsed. I noticed. I didn't call it a sign. Dates have enough work to do without carrying messages from the dead. Quiet justice is rarely one clean door closing. It's a hallway of doors, each opening on its own schedule. Aldergate shut down 6 weeks later. Its warehouse inventory sold at auction for $71,000 after secured costs. Marcus's cash value policy added $22,000. With Nora's return $29,000, the available restitution exceeded what Crosspoint had demanded. The remainder went to Aldergate's lender. Crosspoint terminated the contract and recorded a full release of every claim against the Beacon. It never bought the building. It never got our shelves, or Walter's chair, or the apartment key. Probate approved the buyout after reviewing the appraisal and the monitor's report. Marcus's estate received the $300,000. Insurance proceeds and a secured note for the balance. Renata remained the primary beneficiary of the estate, subject to creditors and to a trust Marcus's will had already established for Nora. She never became a member or manager of Beacon Properties. I became the sole member. I did not become the sole author of its history, and I've stopped wanting to be. The criminal case took longer. Under our state's fraud and forgery statutes, Renata was charged with obtaining property by false pretenses and placing an unauthorized signature on a financial instrument. I learned about it from Marisol, not a headline. The prosecutor asked whether I wanted to submit a statement. Will it decide whether she's Charged? I asked. That decision's already made. Will it decide her sentence? It may inform it. I wrote 3 pages, then tore them up. I wrote 1 page and kept it. I didn't ask for prison. I didn't ask for mercy. I described being told to leave beside my son's casket, finding my own name on a relocation agreement I'd never seen, returning to an apartment where my husband's coat had been labeled inventory. I also wrote that Renata had repaid the diverted funds, admitted responsibility, and was the only living parent of a grieving 17-year-old. I closed with 1 sentence: accountability should protect the truth without requiring another child to lose a second parent. Renata pleaded guilty to 1 felony count under an agreement. That dismissed the second charge. The judge imposed a suspended sentence, 3 years of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and restitution for investigation costs the civil settlement hadn't covered. She was barred from serving as a fiduciary or handling client escrow funds during probation. The conviction ended her professional certification with the Staging Trade Association and made rebuilding Aldergate under a new name essentially impossible. The sentence satisfied neither side of town. Renata lost Aldergate, her house, her certification, and the version of Marcus's death in which she had only protected her daughter. She moved to a 2-bedroom rental near Nora's school and took a salary job with a furniture chain. She also remained Nora's mother. Nora didn't speak to her for 12 days after the confession, staying instead with Renata's sister under an arrangement everyone approved. She didn't move into the Beacon. I didn't ask for custody. I saw her twice during that stretch, both times in Marisol's conference room with a family counselor present, because Nora had asked for a room neither of us could storm out of. At the first meeting, she asked why I hadn't told her sooner about Marcus's payments. Because I wanted to be certain, I said. Or because you wanted Dad to look better? Both. She nodded slowly. Thank you for not making the second one sound nicer. At the second meeting, she asked Renata, directly, why she'd used the tuition account. Because I wanted one part of the money to become something no one could take from you, Renata said, without looking at me. But it wasn't yours. No, did Dad know about the other money? Some of it. Did he know you forged Grandma's name? No, did he want her out? Renata took a long breath. He wanted her to consider moving, if there was a fair sale and somewhere good to go. He never agreed to force her out. He was furious when he saw the fake relocation agreement. Nora cried then. So did Renata. I didn't move closer, that grief belonged to the 2 of them first. When the counselor asked whether I wanted to add anything, I said, your father loved both of you. He also hid money from me and delayed telling me the truth. Love doesn't erase those choices. The choices don't prove the love was false. Nora looked at me. Is that what you believe about Mom too? It was the kind of question teenagers ask after they've already stripped away every safe answer. I believe your mother loves you, I said. I believe she used that love to excuse things that harmed you and other people. What she does next will tell us whether love becomes responsibility. Renata put a hand over her mouth. Nora went home with her 3 days later. I began seeing my granddaughter on Saturdays. At first Renata dropped her off and waited in the car. Later she came inside for coffee and sat at the far end of the store. We spoke about pickup times, school forms, whether Nora had eaten. Boundaries aren't dramatic enough for anyone's retelling. They're more useful than dramatic promises tend to be. 6 months after the buyout, the first estate payment forced the Beacon to become a business again. Sylvia and I hired Dion Marsh, a former hotel operations director who had no patience for family mythology. He rebuilt the events calendar, renegotiated the law office lease, sold 4 of our 6 mismatched banquet chair styles, and required 2 approvals for every related party payment. For the first time, I wrote a succession plan that did not assume love could substitute for procedure. Nora worked the register on Saturdays, exactly as her father had once promised her. She got no management title and no special access, the same hourly wage as the other student clerk, the same closing checklist, the same complaints about it. In April she received an academic scholarship large enough to cover most of her first year. The rest came from Marcus's trust, approved by the probate court. No diverted dollar followed her to campus. The day the scholarship letter arrived, she ran up the store's front steps and handed it to me without a word. I read it twice, though once had already been enough. "Your father would have printed 10 copies, I said. Mom printed 12. We laughed, then stopped at exactly the same moment. "It's okay," Nora said. "We're allowed." She framed 1 copy beside Marcus's photograph. The anniversary of his death approached far more quietly than the funeral had. I began waking again. At 2:13, and some nights I walked down and sat in the history aisle, where Sylvia had once found him. Grief didn't get smaller. It became less surprised by its own weight. One night I finally opened the last carton returned from the storage unit, months after the forensic vendor had released it. I'd been avoiding it because the label read Marcus' personal office. Inside, tax files, old keys, 3 baseball caps, and a stack of high school essays I'd graded in red ink 30 years earlier. He'd kept them his entire life. On top was the essay about the beacon, written when he was 17. I'd given it a B+. Strong images. But you mistake nostalgia for an argument. What should this building become? And who gets to decide? Beneath my old comment, in newer ink, Marcus had written, "Still working on it." I sat on the floor until dawn. For months I had imagined our last unfinished conversation as a courtroom where one of us had to be proven right. That note changed nothing about the money. It didn't absolve him. It didn't condemn me. It reminded me only that our argument had begun long before Crosspoint ever existed, and would have gone on if he'd lived. Parents and children can love each other straight across a question neither one ever solves. On the first anniversary, we held no memorial service. Nora asked to open the second-floor events room to anyone who wanted to tell a story about her father. Dion capped attendance at the fire code. Sylvia made coffee. Renata brought a tray of sandwiches and asked where to set it down. "The back table," I said. It was the first time she'd been inside the beacon since the mediation. She looked toward the elevator. "May I go upstairs?" My body remembered the funeral before my mind found an answer. I saw the blue folder. The packed suitcase. Walter's coat sleeve trailing out of a trash bag. "Why?" I asked. She opened her purse and set my old brass apartment key in my palm. Des had kept it after changing the lock. Renata had found it while clearing out Aldergate's office. It no longer opened anything. It had no practical value at all. "You may come up after the gathering," I said. "Nora comes with us." She nodded. 40-some people told stories that afternoon. A former employee remembered Marcus carrying boxes through a snowstorm to save an author event. A bride remembered him producing a backup cake at midnight after hers collapsed. Grant Osei sent a letter describing Marcus as the only seller who'd ever corrected Crosspoint's measurement of the back alley, because he refused to profit from 6 feet of pavement that wasn't his. Sylvia read one line from the 8:14 email, leaving out the financial detail. Nora told everyone her father sang badly and without a trace of shame. I spoke last. "Marcus helped save this building," I said. He also wanted to sell it. He made choices here that hurt people, and he tried to correct some of them before he ran out of time. Today isn't improved by making him flawless. He was my son. That's more durable than flawless. After the room emptied, Nora, Renata, and I took the elevator up. My apartment looked like a home again. Walter's photographs sat back in their frames. His green coat hung by the door. Marcus's high school essay lay under glass on the desk. Renata stopped in front of it. "He showed me that once," she said. "He told me the red comment was the first time you'd ever treated him like an adult. I thought he hated it." He did. He also remembered it. The words had become a family inheritance now, passed hand to hand. Nora opened the balcony door. Evening light spread across Main Street, and the copper beacon fixture above the store came on automatically, for minutes slow the way it had run for years. I'd never bothered fixing it. That night it lit the sidewalk exactly as the courthouse clock struck 7. Renata looked at the useless key still in my hand. "I can't undo what I did." "No, I'm sorry." I believed her. Believing an apology doesn't require handing back the key to the person who changed the lock. "I hear you," I said. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't refusal, either. It was the truth available to me that day. She left with Nora 20 minutes later. At the door, my granddaughter hugged me and asked whether I'd drive down for family weekend in October. "If invited." "You're invited." After they'd gone, I carried Marcus's photograph downstairs. For a year it had stood by the register where everyone could see it. I moved it instead to the history table, beside a small card Nora had written in careful print. "He helped build what came next." Before opening the store the next morning, I went back upstairs and set the old brass key into a wooden box, alongside Walter's fountain pen and Marcus's unfinished legal pad. I didn't keep them as weapons, or as proof of anything. The copies the case had needed were already exactly where they belonged, filed away with people whose job it was to hold them. I kept these because objects can go on holding the shape of a lesson long after the anger that found them has finally let go. At my son's funeral, Renata believed that if she could make me stop crying, carry a suitcase, and surrender a key, the building would become hers to sell and the story would become hers to tell. She was wrong about the building. For a while, I was more afraid she might be right about the story. But a family story isn't saved by making one person innocent and another monstrous. It's saved by refusing to let love erase the evidence, and refusing to let the evidence erase every trace of the love. I still live above the beacon. The mortgage is current. Marcus's estate note is paid on the 1st of every month. Nora calls on Sundays and works the register during school breaks. Renata and I are not friends. We share one obligation, not to make her daughter pay for either of our failures. Walter's green coat still hangs by my door. The old key doesn't open anything anymore. I keep it anyway, not because I want the lock back, but because it reminds me of the day I learned the difference between being allowed into a home and having the right to stand in it. No one has asked me to pack my bag since.